My name is Scott Paulson. I'm the moderator because I can read a script. That is the requirement. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. This is the session on understanding ICC's financial management. Amy Young, financial analyst, and Ed Babcock, controller, will lead today's session. Amy has been with ICC for 3 years and Ed for 24. Amy works in accounting and assists with budget development and actual monthly reporting. Ed oversees all financial aspects of the college as the controller. At the end, they'll explain the pros and cons of SB1 for us. But until then, please help me welcome Amy Young and Ed Babcock. All I have to do is read it, and I can't do that. So.
Okay, well, welcome to our session. First, we'll go over our agenda. We're by no means trying to make you accounting experts, but just want to give you kind of an overview of our funding sources and our expenditures, so where our money comes from and where it goes, and then a little bit on fund accounting, just to explain the basic principles of that. And then for those of you that went to the general session yesterday, Dr. Quirk-Bailey showed a fund balance graph, so we're going to spend a little more time dissecting that graph as well, just to make sure that it's clear to everyone. And then Ed will talk a little bit about the budget process. And then we wanted to have time for Q&A, just to allow you guys a chance to ask any questions you may have that's, things that aren't clear about accounting or what accounting does here at ICC. So with that, this is about as creative as accountants get here with this slide. Where does our money come from? It doesn't grow on trees. We have 3 primary revenue sources here. Can anyone tell me what those are?
Property taxes?
Yes. Tuition. Yep.
State funding. And
state funding. So we still call that a primary source. But just to give you a little bit of perspective, this is a graph we show in our budget book each year. We typically don't go back this far, but to put it into perspective for you, back to 2003, the red bar is the state support, as you might guess. The green bar is the tuition and fees. And then the blue bar is real estate taxes. So back in 2003, we had only a $1.1 million gap between state support and our tuition and fees. So we really used to say that our funding was really a third, and a third. They were relatively close. Now going out to 2020, we're projecting that gap to be about $23 million. So you can see, we talk about that 3-legged stool. There still is a third leg. It's really just a little bit of a stump now, though. And you can see there's that dip in 2016, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, where we really got very little funding from the state. So that's at a high level where our money comes from. Where does it go? I'm sure you guys can probably all guess the biggest expense is salaries and benefits. So the blue chunk there is salaries, and then that maroon chunk up there, it's 14%. It's a little hard to see the percentages. That's employee benefits. So if you take those two together, that's 75% of our total spend in our operating budget. So I know Dr. Quirk-Bailey yesterday mentioned position management and savings we'd had from that. So that's really those 2 buckets. And then all of the other savings we've had in discretionary spending, she'll say, is that last 25% there, which you can see is made up of a lot of different items. And really, when we look at that closer, some of those are relatively fixed costs. And the orange section is called fixed costs. And that's really some of our systems, TouchNet, PeopleSoft, so licenses that we have to pay for those. So we don't have a lot of control over that. And then that blue bar right next to it, the light blue one, is our utilities of 4%. So really, you take salary and benefits in those two, and we're at 85% of our budget is relatively fixed, at least in the short term. So just to kind of give you an idea of where the expenditures are. In this graph, this is our 2018 budget, and so this will be approved. The final budget hopefully will be approved by the board tomorrow. But this chart and those percentages really doesn't change year to year. It's pretty much 75% is salary and benefits. So now we're going to talk a little bit about fund accounting. Fund accounting is not really that much different than regular accounting. It's just the idea that our resources are restricted by certain governing bodies. So legally, when we have our property taxes, we can't just spend that money however we want. So fund accounting is just a mechanism to ensure that we are spending our money appropriately according to the laws that govern us. So it's really a way of measuring accountability rather than profitability. If you think of it in terms of a business, it's really looking at their bottom line. Ours is really making sure that we're properly spending our money, recording our revenues, and fairly stating that on our financial statements. So to contrast, we have a dump truck here, and you can think of a small business or a corporation, really as they get funds in and they have revenues, everything goes into their dump truck. And then as they need to spend, wherever they need to spend it, they can spend their money out of that dump truck. It all goes into one spot and they can pull from that spot. And yes, there's different corporations, they have business units and things like that, but really it's, for the most part, one bucket of money. So fund accounting is a little bit different, and we're going to show a video, which some of you have probably already seen, but
I go over to Dusty's little apartment in Pasadena one time, and he says, hey, can you loan me some money? Yeah. My wife was working. I wasn't working, but my wife was working. So I said, how much you need? He said, I don't know, $5 or whatever. And
more than that.
So I go into his kitchen, and he has these mason jars up on a ledge. And one of them says rent, one of them says entertainment, one says books, one says about 5 of them, all labeled.
Electric.
And they all had money in it, except the one that said food. And that didn't happen to have any money. So I said to him, well, you don't need any money, you got money. He says, I can't take the money out of the other jars.
okay, so it's kind of a funny video, but really that is the basics of fund accounting. So we've got our different jars up here, and that's really how you can think of it, different jars, different checking accounts for us to manage all of our different funds. So we have 12 funds here. I will not take you through all 12 of the funds because you probably would fall asleep on me, but I just wanted to go over a few of the funds and what they mean. So first of all, we've got our operating funds, and you don't see anywhere up here that it just says operating funds. Really, our operating funds are funds 1, 2, and 12. So it's the education fund, operations and maintenance, and then ancillary, which you maybe called tort sometimes. So when we showed those charts previously, the expenditures and our primary funding sources, we always say operating budget. And really, when you hear that, it's really just 3 of the 12 funds that the college has. So those 3 funds that we're usually talking about is 1, 2, and 12. Another one, Fund 3, it's called Operations and Maintenance Restricted Funds. That's really our capital projects funds. And so that fund, we have revenues in there, from property tax dollars. Those funds are restricted, that we can only use them for that purpose. So that's a common question that we get. Well, if you're having, you're watching salary expenses, but you're building, well, those funds are restricted. We can't use those for operations. Fund 5 is auxiliary funds, and that's one that you probably encounter from time to time. That's our business service areas, bookstore, cafeteria, fitness center, the child care center is now in there, athletics is in there, PDI. So all of those areas that should be kind of self-sustaining operations are in that auxiliary fund. Fund 6 is one that a lot of you probably have interaction with, and that's really, it's restricted funds, but for the most part we think of it as grants that we receive. And then Fund 10 is one that if any of you have different groups or things, that one is, it is one of our funds, but it's not really, we just have a checking account for it basically, so we don't show revenue and expense on that right now. It's just different funds that we hold for different organizations throughout the college. So now I want to talk a little bit about fund balance, because that's one that's come up in various presentations and people are talking about. So I just added 2 slides in after yesterday morning's general session. The next slide I will show is the one that Dr. Cork-Bailey showed, but I think it might be a little confusing at first. So this is our basic fund balance chart that we show in our budget each year. There's a board policy that our fund balance needs to be between 25 and 50%. And that's what those two yellow lines mean. And when we talk about fund balance, really all that is what is our balance, and really think of it as our checking account balance. How much money do we have saved divided by our total expenditures. So you can see in 2016 we're at 35.8, and then we're projecting kind of a gradual growth. So this is just kind of the basic, and we just want to make sure that we're within those yellow bars. And again, this is operating funds. So it's those funds 1, 2, and 12 that we talked about. Now, if we try to incorporate in there and understand a little bit about how the state has impacted us, this is the chart that some of you probably saw yesterday. So I added 2015 on here so that you can see our fund balance was at 41%. In 2016, we dropped, only that blue bar, we dropped to 35.8%. And as a lot of you know, we said that when the state didn't come through in 2016, we had a healthy fund balance, which we did, in the 40% range, so we could kind of weather the storm out and see what happened. So we took a dip in our fund balance, and we ended up at 35.8%. So that red chunk there, 7%, is just to show what our fund balance would have been had we received that money from the state. So we would have been at 42.8% had the state come through on what we expected. So then going out to 2018 through 2020, what we're trying to reflect in those yellow bars is how much is at risk if the state money doesn't come through. So really what it shows is if the state doesn't come through on what we've projected for our budget, our fund balance would still be 32.8%. So we're still within that range. Not that we want to dip that low, but we're still within that range of 25 to 50%. So now this is not cumulative. You know, if the state didn't come through for 18, 19, or 20, it would be a different story, but just showing per year. So really, for 2018, again, we're projecting 40.8% if you go back to the previous slide. And this chart just breaks it down into how much is that state money. Yeah.
Just make a comment. I was on the presidential search committee, and candidates who came in to see us mostly all commented how well positioned we were here. Do you know, compared to other schools that we've heard are having financial trouble in the state, like Eastern, I think, and Chicago State, do you know where they're at in a similar ratio? I assume it's probably, if I had to guess, in the 15% area?
There are actually a lot of community colleges as part of our system that have had no fund balance. They've actually had to spend into their working cash fund balance. Okay. And now that the state is supposedly going to come through, they're working on just replenishing the working cash balance with no fund balance. You get to the collar schools up in Chicago, and their fund balance is off the chart to the good because they are not reliant as much on the state, even though they're much bigger than we are. They don't rely on the state because they've got the huge property tax base. So it goes anywhere from people have none. The standard is across community colleges, the goal is to be between 25 and 50%. Some colleges are 75% and some are in the hole right now.
So does that reflect that 1.6 check that we got or whatever from the state?
That we got for 17?
Yeah. So wasn't it for last year, but we actually got it in this year?
Yes, so right now what this chart shows is the 2017 money coming in 2017 for the budget that was passed in early July. Now,
so that's why there's an incremental uptick with the 1.6.
Yes, so the idea is that really, and the reason we included 2015 is to show that 2018, if you add that 8% and the 32.8, we're at 40.8, so we're at 41%, and we're getting back to the level we were at in 2015. So we basically said we could weather the storm, and then in 2 years, we can build that back. Now, one side note is, though, that might not be the actual way we have to record it. For our auditors, we might actually, the end answer will be the same in 2018, but we might actually show our 2017 fund balance would show a little lower, and then there'd just be a bigger increase in 18, because since that budget wasn't passed until July, we may actually have to show that as 18 revenue. It doesn't change in the end where we'd end up, though. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, we started off the year with $2.1 million from the state. Then come July 4th or 6th, they gave us an additional almost $4 million that they said they're going to give us $4 million, and it's supposed to be for 17. They've since given us about half of that. Came in July, and they're supposed to give us, we were only originally budgeting about $1.6 million from the state for 18, and then they came back in and gave us $4.5 million for 18. So if the state actually comes through the way they say they're going to, we'll be back to where we were in 15 with a nice cushion. But as Dr. Bailey likes to say, she's worried that the spigot's going to get turned off. I'm a little bit more positive to say that they can't really turn it off. They can crank it down. They can slow it down a lot. There's a lot of schools out there, the Southern Illinois schools, that if you shut off the state funding, they're going to go bankrupt. You've got schools like Spoon River that they're going to get ate up by somebody if they don't get their state money, because they rely very heavily on the state funding. So ever shutting it off, I'm not sure that's going to happen, but they could definitely turn it down. And luckily we have a fund balance that supports that we can afford a couple bad years in there. We just can't afford 3, 4, 5 years like that.
Yeah, and on that 18 budget, the additional revenue that we added after our tentative budget, based on this budget being passed, we only added 25% in expenditures. And a big piece of that was adding raises for all of the non-bargaining unit employees. So we're holding 75% back to raise up that fund balance again.
And going forward, we've sort of looked at it and said, let's base our 19 to 20 off of what the state says they're going to give us for 18, but let's drop it down 10% with the idea that we don't believe it's going to be funded at 100%. And we're just guessing to some extent to say a reasonable decline that we could afford is 10%. We're also basing some of our revenue projections on CPI increases for enrollment tuition rate increases, pretty much flat to minimal increases in enrollment numbers.
How were we this year, yeah?
Haven't come out yet. It hasn't come out yet.
Well, right now, it's all the way they do their numbers. Today, we're up 8%.
Right.
But we enrolled all the dual credit at the very end last year.
Okay.
They're looking to be up 1% is what they're really stretching to be at. We budgeted 2%. So 1% would be good. At least we would not be going in the opposite direction where we've gone down 2% last year, 4.6 the year before, 8 the year before that. I mean, we've been steadily working our way the wrong way.
Any other questions on this graph or fund balance? Okay, it's you, Ed, with budget. Turn your
We'll talk a
microphone
little bit about the budget process. We typically call it a bottom-up, top-down process. What we do in the budget process is we ask the deans, department chairs to enter their budgets of what they think it's going to cost them to run their areas. Roll all that up. But on the other side of it, we're doing what we think we're going to get in income way before they ever do that piece of it. Because we have to levy our taxes in November. So we know in November of the year before what we're going to get in taxes pretty much. We have to set our tuition rate in February. So we know what the rate's going to be set in February. We have a guess on the state, but that's when the state doesn't come through is when we get into a bind. So for example, last year when the state wasn't going to come through, we'd already set our expenditures of what we thought we could cover with the revenue. Then the state didn't come through for the 1.8 million, and that's where Dr. Bailey came through with the contingency, and we had to cut 1.8. Again, we were trying to cut 1.8 million out of that 25% slice of the pie, because salaries for faculty, salaries for the union had already been set. Our raises or our wages were already in there. Utilities you really can't cut. Your contracts that you had for your operating systems, you really can't cut. So it leaves you with conference and meetings, material and supplies, and other miscellaneous type of items, small capital that we might have in there. So trying to cut that 1.8 million out of that small piece, we were really lucky that we were able to do that actually and do it beyond that. We were budgeting to be even with a $1.8 million loss from the state. We were trying to figure out how to do that. We will actually finish up the year $500,000 ahead of that, even with a very bad benefit year, because we're self-funded. So we have that top-down or bottom-up, top-down approach. We'll go through the process, and then what happens at the very end of the process is you guys have asked for a certain amount of money. I basically roll it all together and say, well, we've only got $50 million worth of revenue, and they're asking for $51 million. Then it comes down to the deans and the vice presidents to say, all right, where are we going to find the $1 million from? So it's not ideal because we don't actually get to spend exactly what we want to do, but we are a little bit more flexible than people think. For example, if the math area would have a huge spike in enrollment, we would adjust their budget accordingly if we needed to for supplies, if we need to have more faculty members, different things like that. At the same time, if English had a dive, we'd probably steal some of the money from there and roll it over. And that's sort of what Julie and we look at the budget on a constant basis to see where we're at, because Pat could call up and say, hey, I need an additional $1,000 for this reason because my enrollment was up 10%. Well, we'll find a place to steal the $1,000 from somebody else where their enrollment wasn't up. Or if we are lucky enough to have enrollment up 10%, we only budgeted for a 2% increase, we'll find the money for that too, because that's a good problem, but we haven't had that for a while. So basically, budgeting is more of, that's the planning side of it. Then the discipline is you guys being careful on what you're spending in there and not just spending it because you have it. We've tried to work very hard not to fall into the state pattern of whatever you have, spend it. If you don't spend it, you lose it. We don't want to do it that way. The idea is spend what you need to operate, and then don't spend what you don't need, because we never know when something bad could happen in another area, something unexpected could happen. So that's sort of the constant discipline that you guys have to keep so that we do have some money left over. And then we monitor it as we go. We monitor it all year round. Dr. Bailey is asking, on a monthly basis, we give reports to the board. We were projecting, probably since March, we were projecting a different number for almost every week, because she wanted to know where we're going to stand. We thought we were going to make it, and surprisingly, we came in the year $500,000 to the good. With the state money coming in for next year, at least the promise of state money, we are actually in a much better situation than most community colleges are. Everybody is sort of taking a sigh of relief because we had to prepare for very little to no state money, and then we actually got a decent size amount. But as Dr. Bailey likes to say, we're going to strategically save. So we really want to build up our savings account, so when the state, or if the state doesn't come through again, or if enrollment would go down, or Caterpillar moves out of town and our property values tank, that we have some money so that we can survive more than 1 year before we're borrowing money from the bank, which some small school districts have to do that, some small community colleges had to do that already. And at some point in time, they just want to loan you any money, and then we have to figure out where we're going to come up with it. Yeah, bond where we have to. Scott?
The discipline issue, and maybe this needs to go to someone else. Do we have anyone at ICC who is monitoring that? Here's an easy example. For Celebration of Learning, there were posters printed of the schedule of our activities. Okay? Then we all got a booklet. And in that booklet, we have 2 pages of summary, and then we have 4 pages of detail. And this sounds sort of to, your old Jewish grandmother or something like that. You could have done maybe all of that digitally. And where does it get to be discipline versus, death by 1,000 paper cuts, where you're looking at pennies or dimes or nickels? But being on the sustainability committee, we run into this a lot where we could save a lot in printing if we just put things online, on TV monitors that exist, and things like that. Do we really have anyone at ICC who is the sustainability cost czar, discipline person to make those suggestions and enforce some sort of policy on little details like that that could add up to some significant money?
There really is nobody who's going to enforce it, Scott. For example, I would give the math department a $2,000 budget. In the big picture of $60 million budget, I sort of give you $2,000, and I don't necessarily worry how you spend it as long as it's roughly in the category you said you were going to spend it in. However, when we were going through the contingency planning this last year, a lot of those type of items did get brought up and then shuffled back to the appropriate vice president, to the appropriate dean, and then sometimes that's where it is. Because that's the way they've always done it, they're not going to change, and it was $2,000. And yeah, We've had the same thing because I get my office alone, where I only have 2 people in it, I get 4 postcards every time there's a PAC event
Right.
in my office. And I'm like, why am I getting 4? But then you start looking at it going, all right, what did that really cost? We produced it in-house. Am I going to raise the stink for the 50 cents that came into my office? But it probably was 50 cents into everybody's office, and it starts to add up. So
I don't know if it's something worth looking into, or if it's really not worth the effort because it's so de minimis.
Well, there's certainly a perception there, sorry, restate that.
No, go ahead.
Because when we're supposed to monitor the number of copies we do, and they're instructional copies, and, you know, send it down to the doc services versus the Xerox machines nearby, and then you get the booklet that I could have done on my phone,
Right.
or the trifold that I did get, which was fine for me, the level of detail that it described, but didn't have all the little stars that I didn't know what they meant, you know, until halfway through the session, but.
You know, some of the monitoring, I think, is occurring more now. Julie can speak to it more because she's the one that is doing a lot of the phone calls, at least bringing it to their attention of, well, I noticed you ordered, you know, directly through this vendor. Did you know ICC has an established partnership with Staples? So bringing it to the department's attention, but how it goes from there to hold them accountable,
I mean, for example, one that I noticed last year was we put all these new drinking stations out there, but yet there's still 5, 6 areas that have bottled water, that they have their own private bottled water.
Oh,
Okay, you sort of looked at the nursing station and said, all right, maybe I can buy that. Beyond that, why do they have bottled water when we got a machine? We just put in a $2,000 machine outside of their door that has the same filtered water that they're buying for a bottle. So you bring it to the attention, but then you sit there and you add up all the bottled water that we spent last year, and it was $3,000, and you're like, am I really going to raise the stink over that? Because it's 6 departments, it's $500. It sort of gets below sometimes my threshold of what I'm looking at. You try to bring it to their attention. If they don't do anything about it until we're out of money.
I'll be the first to admit, you never know if that's enough to make a difference, or if we're spending more money chasing little, you know what I mean?
That's kind of part of it, because when you look at 25% of all that discretionary spending, and you look at, in the grand scheme of what's that going to save, but every little bit does add up, so.
Well, when you look at material and supplies, for example, our material supply budget in operations was, so we took 10% out of it, that's $340,000. So 10% waste, if you sort of look around, you might be able to find 10% waste. It adds up to real money when everybody does it. But then you also run into the problem is, Scott, you did it, you did the right thing, but Kim didn't do the right thing, and then it almost causes more problem because you did what you're supposed to do and she didn't, and the same person isn't holding everybody at the same level of accountability. So.
Just the side note of that. So when Ed's talking about the office and supply budget, right? So lots of envelopes may not be important to you, but it is the student accounting. If I'm sending out collection letters, so my $35 class of envelopes, I may actually get a return of X dollars that maybe another department wouldn't.
I'm primarily focusing, I think, on some of the digital technologies, that sustainability, and I know Bruce is on our that committee, sustainability. If you could show things on television monitors, if you can send emails opposed to printing, you're going to save some money.
Well, that's why I work in advisement, and we don't print catalogs anymore.
Right, yeah, that was a great thing.
We don't print the schedule books, and while we all miss the catalogs, and each advisor gets one, and it can be kind of frustrating for the students to scrolling through our catalog online is really not ideal for them. But the paper schedule books we used to print, those were immediately outdated the second the schedule went live and ceased to take.
Any idea how much money we saved by doing it that way?
I have no idea, but I mean.
Anybody who has a local post office saw them stacked up in the garbage
Yeah.
cans from all the post office boxes too. I mean, they put them in everybody's box.
Right.
The printing for some of the schedules is like $30,000 and another equal amount in mailing costs.
That's a good savings.
Yeah.
It's real savings.
Yeah, that's good savings.
I think we're somewhat slow to the change. For example, we have been, a lot of the printing stuff that we do, we used to do a lot of that out of house. So we were able to purchase equipment, change our technology in-house, and we're able to do it a lot cheaper than we were before. So it's one step, But then there's the next step of, why do we even do it that way? Why don't we just do it electronic? So I think we're kind of slow in making those changes. They are making changes across the board, but it's not always quite as fast as, especially when you're looking sideways.
Sure.
That department, what the heck are they doing? Because my department's doing it right. That's what a lot of people think. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Oh, so you were done?
I'm done. I'm done.
So you're done.
I asked if there's any questions.
So I actually had a comment more than a question, kind of. One of the things that, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past, and I think many departments do a crappy job of this, is monitoring the number of students per section when they set schedules. So like, we're pretty intentional about how many sections of a particular class, let's say beginning algebra or whatever, at a given time slot, always looking back at the previous spring or previous fall relative to what we're doing. And I think we've been doing a pretty decent job, even in the face of declining enrollment, keeping our costs, actually our margin, up. In fact, in light of whatever our enrollment increase was, which may, I saw like 4.6, but like you said, who knows with the dual credit, but in the math area, we actually have fewer sections, and they're all pretty full. They're all like full. And I think so like, here's the classic example. If we do an online section of a class, we won't, there's maybe an exception to this, but generally, we won't have a second section of that online class until that one fills. Instead of opening 4 of them that all half fill, which I've seen on several occasions. And I mean, I don't think we're smart about that side of enrollment management. And it depends on which department you're in.
Yeah, so, well, as you know, I do some analysis for I give analysis to each of the deans every semester. And we monitor that margin per credit hour at the subject level, and then actually, if they're interested, at the class level. And we show, average enrollments and the direct revenues associated with the course, and then direct costs. And really, I'm talking really just the cost of instruction, because there's really no way for me to know that these supplies were for this class. But we do monitor that. Now, where it goes from there gets a little tricky. I give that information to the deans. I think they all appreciate it. And I've seen different levels of action taken by the various deans. Could they collaborate more? Certainly. I think I have seen some improvement.
I think it has to come from the top down more. I think the collaboration falls out when they don't see each other as knowing more than the other one, right? I mean, they're all peers.
Right. And then there's another element of this that gets a little tricky too, that as we're trying to make our courses accessible for everybody and evening courses and stuff, we are going to see some of our average class sizes actually decline in certain areas because we're trying to increase that accessibility as well. But as long as it's done intentionally, yes, strategically, it's okay. But beyond, I'm providing the reporting and the data, but
I know.
the decisions need to happen.
I know you guys don't have governance over necessarily that level.
Yep.
I'm just saying
but I do agree
that's a huge area, and so since I'm on a soapbox, and I'm on camera apparently. Come on. This is
can we turn the camera off?
Well, we're talking about revenue. Yeah, you can turn it off. This is fares out to here. The other thing that we talked about is wait lists. And I know whatever problems there are with PeopleSoft being able to make the wait list happen. But in the face of when there are enrollment increases, and so like, I can give you a couple examples. We had like Math 110, Math 115, Math 098, like full, like every section full. And so if I had a wait list, I would know exactly where to allocate any new resources to maybe open up another section. And we just pot shotted it, did 098 at 9 o'clock, it filled again. And this was like 2 weeks out. But if I had a wait list, I would know exactly where to maybe move an instructor from a class that had 2 that we knew we were going to end up canceling probably. Open up a new section of that other one. And even if you don't capture the entire group on that wait list for whatever reason, and I know there's logistics involved, but we've talked about this for 3 years. There's a box right there on PeopleSoft. May not be activated, maybe we customized it past what we can use. But I could move people and capture. I said I would pilot in one class, one section that we know will fill, that you can gauge interest. and it's just never gone anywhere in 3 years.
Is there any reason why you have to have the wait list on PeopleSoft? You couldn't just keep it at your administrative assistant's desk?
Yeah, go talk to her about that one.
Okay.
The problem is the logistics. So the wait list I was on for a motorcycle class that was on our campus through ISU, I had to pay up front to be on the wait list.
Okay, cool.
If I didn't get into the class, they were going to refund my money. I was like 10 back, and I still get in, and I was like ecstatic.
Right.
And
And there's efficiencies in having that pay in front.
right, so other schools do it.
Seriously.
Hey, do you want to say something?
And I think it has to go through PeopleSoft so that the students can register themselves, then it will automatically, when they're in there.
That would be ideal, but I've had experience maybe of I had an administrative assistant keeping a wait list. When, getting a call, hey, that class is filled up, is there any chance there'll be another section? Well, let me take down your name and number, and if something happens to open up,
Right, but if I have 10 098s,
Right.
and I can look at the wait list on every individual section, and I can say there's critical mass here.
Right.
That's when I'm putting the new spot.
Yeah, I realize it'd be ideal to have it more automated and tied in with registration and everything too, but.
I just think we're potentially losing out on.
I think they are. I've heard rumblings at the top more of opening up more sections. Some of it I think is tied into contract negotiations. I don't know a lot of it of what hours people.
I think the remedy he's suggesting doesn't really
No,
affect that.
No. I got adjuncts that I could pull if I needed to. This is just purely
Efficiency.
knowing- yeah.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know how many people didn't get into 098 or 110. I have no idea. None. I get a couple calls saying, they weren't able to get in. Okay, what time slot would they have signed up for? I mean, that's.
But you think there would be a way for us technology-wise to collect that information?
It's on PeopleSoft. Now, I don't know where we're at system-wise relative to PeopleSoft, but it's a feature built into the thing.
That would
And
be
other schools do it. I just think that's what I'm saying. I mean, it would be very easy to just pilot it in 1 or 2 classes.
What branches of the tree have you gone up to try and find that answer?
Tracy Morse is the one in charge of it. That's who we've had college-wide meetings with, people that this all sounded like a year or
Okay.
2 ago. And
That's right, I recall that, you're right.
But I mean, I don't want to be the one I'm doing it because I believe in the college and I help manage enrollment from that side, and I think it's.
And you're right, it would.
And I hear from
efficient.
people not being able to get into classes all the time, and I'm like, well, we had declining enrollment, so I don't know where I'm going to cut sections versus add sections.
Right.
But wait list would get around that,
Yep.
at least to some extent. I don't know. I just think it's a lost revenue, potentially.
Any other items?
This is me.
Yeah, you're Pat.
Right. I might as well be a presenter.
When you say we're self-funded for like insurance and benefits, what does that mean?
We do not have, like most people, you would just go out to country companies and you would have a insurance policy that you pay and you know it's going to be $1,000 a year and this is the coverage you're going to get. What we do is you guys all pay a small, and it really is a small amount of money for your coverage, for your individual coverage or family coverage. Okay, then we have a semi-insurance policy for the claims that are excessive. We call it a stop-loss policy, which will cover things that are over $250,000. But anything else, the college is paying out of their pocket. So we're managing our own insurance plan, and that's why we call ourselves self-funded. We're not paying that big premium out to a third company to manage it. Everybody thinks Consociate is our insurance company. They're just really our manager of our plan. So we have to pay every bill that we have. If Pat goes to the hospital, we're paying the bill. Doesn't matter, he's not gonna get charged anything more from the college beyond what the deductible and what is allowed in the plan, but we have to pay that out of our own pocket. So it's not a third party, it's not a set cost going into the year. If we knew it was gonna cost us $8 million going into the year and we could just write the check to the insurance company, then that's great. But then all of a sudden, in the next year, we don't have control over it. If they tell us that the insurance is gonna cost us $12 million, we gotta pay it. At the same time, if we only had $6 million worth of claims and we still paid $12 million worth of insurance premiums, you get stuck. So it's really economy of scale that is supposed to work out on our behalf because we're large enough to be self-funded. But when you have large medical claims by an extraordinary amount of people, then it doesn't work out. When you guys are all healthy, It's good for the college. It really is good for the college.
How have we been doing on that?
We've been
Not good.
awful. This year we were $1.2 million over on our benefit costs. Our benefit costs were around $8 million. So
Is that the first time we've been over for a while? Or?
now we've been over the last 3 years.
Okay, so that's going to be subject to contract.
Negotiation, thanks.
Yeah,
You know that's coming, so.
it's
Well, we met last semester already about.
Yeah.
and usually it's a cyclical type of thing where you have a really bad year and then the next year you get lucky. We've had 3 bad years in a row, and you just run into that problem of you never know. I mean, we were doing pretty good up until late in the year, and then we had some issues, and all of a sudden things went really bad. I mean, we made a lot of positive changes in our plan to our prescription drug plan that we were using, going wholly with Methodist, a lot of things that were saving the college money, but the claim activity is totally out of our control, and when it goes bad, it goes bad. Anything else? Scott, you gotta wrap it up?
Okay, that's it. If you didn't sign in, please sign in. Otherwise, you have evaluations. Please fill them out and put them on the card here. And let's thank our presenters for their time. And